fourth-year architecture student and the founder slash editor-in-chief slash president slash pretty much everything of the Folly Architecture Journal as of now. It's an in-the-works publication about architecture theory and criticism at this school. I would also like to thank Alex Rumley and Sydney Deco for their help brainstorming our approach last semester. I wanted to give a quick preamble for the debate. I'll go over the journal, the format, and then our two guests. So our first issue, for now titled At All Costs, will focus on architecture for its own sake. We speculate what might happen when the cultural pendulum swings back from where it currently sits in a place of functionalist neutrality, where architecture, in our eyes, has become more of a stale and timid pursuit pushed to the perimeter of culture for the sake of expedience and performance in every other category but architecture itself. If we are, and I attest that we are, being educated in a time where architecture is seen firstly as a vessel for other pursuits, disciplines, and ideologies, what happens when the pendulum swings back? What happens when we once again attest that architecture is uniquely unsubtle and definitively not neutral? Has the time come for us once more to propose that architects should place architecture above all else? That a work of architecture need not be rationalized by anything outside of the medium? Perhaps these ideas are too selfish, too inward, but maybe they are also all we can actually offer the world. Put simply, we want this issue to reinsert architecture into the cultural conversation, not as a means to another end, but as a valuable thing on its own terms. The time has come for architects to care about architecture again. Our work will extend beyond the school. We want to feature student and faculty pieces alongside guest writers from around the country. Part of our goal is to expand our connection and participation in contemporary discourse as a school. If these are the important topics of our time, how can we sit back and let other people decide the outcomes for us? If you're interested in joining our polemic, please send me an email I'll share the email at the end, so I'm not just going to repeat it. Also, for any faculty interested in participating in any of these events, also please reach out to me. A large part of this pursuit, sorry for the clipping, maybe even the most important are these public events. It's not enough to publish esoteric thought pieces online, although that part, trust me, is going to be really great. Don't worry, but we also need to engage one another in conversations. We need to debate, and we need to fight and win and lose. As I said, architecture is not neutral, and that means neither is architectural education. Even the assertion that there really does exist this plane of democratic neutrality without commitment to any one specific doctrine is itself an ideology. I want you to know what makes you and your friends tick. How can we help one another grow without proposing convincing alternatives to their ideas and work? Events like this are an opportunity to see what ideas motivate those in charge of your education, and then what ideas from those you share or detest. I hope the faculty here can express themselves wholeheartedly and thus open the door for us to take sides. Again, architecture is not neutral, and our ideas and work should be put to the test. Speaking of taking sides, I got a request from Ben and Joseph. They want to see a show of hands on who, before the debate, thinks that Rem Koolhaas is the GOAT. It's an uphill battle.
Are you counting?
Yeah, I am now.
Somebody's got to count.
Sam, is that a hand?
I'm undecided.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4,
Undecided,
5,
okay.
6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Okay, 20, 21, okay. Now, Frank Gehry. Can we get a show of hands for Frank Gehry? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Wow, a lot of undecided.
Wow.
More than 32 people.
Wow, okay.
Okay, that brings us to our two participants today, Joseph Bedford and Ben Pennell. They both have graciously offered to take part in the Folly Architecture Journal's first ever public event, let alone a debate, and I'm incredibly grateful to both of them. In one corner, Joseph is an associate professor of history and theory at our school. He's literally in the corner.
Yeah.
Committed to uncovering and testing the ideas that drive architectural culture and production, as well as our education. And in the other corner, or in the same corner, but a little bit further, is Ben Pennell. He's a visiting assistant professor of practice and an independent practitioner who promotes a hands-on approach to making one's own magnum opus. Today, they will be debating the identity of the greatest architect of all time. Is it Rem Koolhaas or Frank Gehry? They will each have 15 minutes to present their arguments, followed by a 20-minute discussion between themselves, and then finally we will open the floor to the audience. If all goes well, we'll be getting to the heart of what drives these two as they fight on behalf of our idols. If all goes even better, we might just get to the heart of what drives architecture as a whole. Does it lay in ideas or aesthetics? In the heaven above or the ground below? Is it in academia.edu or Home Depot? Two will go in, but only one can come out. This is a battle for our hearts, and I beg you to take a side because we'll all be better off for it. This is Rem Koolhaas versus Frank Gehry. This is Joseph Bedford versus Ben Pennell. Yeah.
All right, so my name is Ben Pennell. Thank you everyone for coming. And Gary is the GOAT. There's no debate, but there is a debate. So anyways, thank you for coming. The criteria that I made up myself for why I think he's the best is these four things. The first thing is, how much have these two architects expanded the language of architecture? And then after having expanded the language of architecture, how well, with respect to craft and invention, things like that, did they execute and physicalize their ideas? And then the third and fourth thing, I don't have time to talk about it in 20 minutes, but I'm thinking maybe we'll kind of invariably weed into this territory with the conversation, which is, what is their cumulative impact on the contemporary culture of architecture? What is perhaps their cumulative impact on the history of mankind? So firstly, in terms of Gary's breadth, the diversity of his portfolio, I think, like great artists from the 20th century, from world history, he has distinct phases, all of which are completely unique contributions, such as Picasso, Bob Dylan. You think about these people in terms of phases, and each of them is their own discrete contribution. So Gary has four: collagist, postmodernism, abstraction with a little bit of cubism, this kind of Baroque, heroic period, and then finally his late work, which is just throwing everything at the wall and just seeing what happens, and just total absence of caution and things like that. So the first project that everybody knows is his own house in Santa Monica. This was an extremely explosive piece of architecture. It was offensive, it was in your face, and it really questioned, what architects could do. Were we supposed to be making perfect works of art, or are we supposed to be, challenging the nature of, what is a home and things like that? Importantly, it borrows from a number of artists, such as Robert Rauschenberg with his combines, which suggests this interesting ontological break where the canvas is no longer this kind of aesthetic picture plane, but is instead bringing in elements from the outside, and things are floating outside of the picture plane into our physicalized space. So I think Gary is interested in these ontological breaks with reality. He's bringing that into his work. He's also literally bringing into that work these kind of rough materials and just working with this very informal setting. Architecturally, I think you can kind of contextualize him within the background of, let's say, the kind of Sea Ranch vernacular architects who were thinking about pure form, again, a kind of unpretentious demonstration of just volumes and shadows and things like that. And then lastly is Gordon Matta Clark. I think it's important to note that the majority of Frank Gehry's influences come from outside of the discipline of architecture, and that requires not just simply copying other architects and collaging this item on top of that item, but looking at these paintings, these works of sculpture, these installation pieces, and thinking critically about how he can meaningfully integrate them into the realm of ordinary life. So I think he does that very well in this first phase of his work. This is another image of that house where you can see the house is this kind of, it's this box of gerbils that's being kind of shook up. The roof is kind of clashing into the kitchen down below. So there's a sense of activity, of explosiveness. There's also some interesting material studies that are taking place. Gehry is a formalist, but he's also got a lot of really wonderful things to say about material. Here, importantly, the glass goes beyond the mullion of this kind of abstract prism. And so the glass is not simply the absence of material. The glass is an actual an actual material with kind of artistic, aesthetic properties that he recognizes. This is the interior. There's a lot of great photos of this house, and they're famous for having, of course, this extremely radical idea about what a home is, but they're also famous for this kind of warm domestic tone. And so he's not just this avant-garde architect that's, giving you this unlivable, cave in the middle of, a dungeon-like space. He's giving you this extremely, radical, form, and then he's also giving you this comfortable space to live in. So this is the kitchen, quite possibly the most famously photographed space. And there's another interesting game of materials taking place here where instead of using like an oak floor or concrete or tiles, some kind of architectural material that we would associate with interiority, he instead uses asphalt. And this is really important because just as Rauschenberg's paintings, again, are kind of leaping in and out of certain ontological spaces, we are meant to feel as though we are sort of caught between this interiorized, sealed space, and then we are also outside, which is made like extremely apparent, again, not just as a conceptual idea, but by actually dealing with materials. The rest of his works from this period are equally effective, and I think they belong to this realm of postmodernism, but importantly, they are not simply these rhetorical things that are, again, existing sort of outside of the space of ordinary life. Venturi's buildings, for instance, are these kind of empty cardboard symbols. Frank Gehry's work is simultaneously whimsical, frivolous, and crazy, but in the context of Santa Monica Beach, where that's kind of the spirit of a lot of these houses, it seems to fit right in. Let's say, artistic counterpart that I think about in terms of like this, blockbuster status is Steven Spielberg. This is a really wonderful movie. My guess is that sadly not everyone in this room has seen E.T., which is a big mistake. But E.T. is an extremely important film because Steven Spielberg is referencing all of these really powerful science fiction novels which present these otherworldly experiences as totally, beyond our comprehension, and he famously kind of brings them down to earth. And so we follow the protagonist as though we are the protagonist, these ordinary kids, living in this suburban neighborhood who nevertheless experience this profound kind of metaphysical phenomena in the form of this alien sitting in this milk crate wrapped in a bed sheet. I mean, we just take this for granted, but again, alien movies before this point had been about, again, this totally otherworldly thing. It had never been brought down to earth and contextualized like this. And that's what gives it that, really emotive magic. Anyways, here's some more works from this period. These are the Indiana Avenue apartments. Really wonderful kind of Venturi-like games where he's taking architectural elements such as the stair and the fireplace in the window. I'll use the pointer. But he's blowing them up to this absurd scale. And then after he's doing that, he's revealing these extremely wonderful tectonic moments on the inside. And so we are seeing them simultaneously as like symbolism from an urban point of view, and then this totally bizarre foreign world on the inside. These were extremely sought after spaces from like artists and hippies from that period. And anyways, here's another work, the Davis Residence, where he's using his famous vernacular language of just cheap sheetrock and then ordinary construction materials. So it's the kind of unfinished architecture. Anyways, that's his first phase. His second phase has to do, again, with kind of cubism and abstraction, where now he's looking beyond the realm of like the architectural idiom and representing it in this sort of unfinished state. And he's looking at, people like Picasso with these sort of disembodied figures. I think he's also looking at Aldo Rossi and basically deciding that a piece of architecture is a body, a piece of architecture is a living creature that he can sort of take apart. And so while Rossi has these extremely poetic drawings that kind of descale, mythologize, animate these otherwise inanimate objects and buildings, Frank Gehry is taking these extremely poetic concepts and realizing them in physical space in ways that nobody thought possible. It's worth saying that simply nothing like this had ever existed prior to Frank Gehry making it. This is a wholly original architectural language, and yet at the same time there is this obvious kind of trace of architecture in the form of these double-hung windows. So one almost gets the impression that this is some kind of hill town that's being analogized in the form of this pseudo-architectural piece of sculpture. Just as he's making these extremely innovative formal tectonic cuts on the exterior, he's making those same innovations on the interior. This is another interesting piece from that period. He's collaborating with Klaus Oldenburg. This is the MIT Stata Center, in which, once again, you are seeing this parallel world of abstract shapes, abstract art, abstract sculpture, and he is completely throwing caution to the wind. But he is also giving us, once again, this kind of ghostly presence of architecture. So, it again ontologically exists in several different spaces. This is a really wonderful piece of architecture. It's a very large academic building, something like 200,000 square feet, and part of Frank Gehry's contribution, I would say, urbanistically, architecturally, was to break this down into a series of 10 or 12 constitutive buildings that have their own personalities. So it's kind of like, a bunch of like gerbils in a cage. They're kind of arguing with one another. His third phase is his Baroque heroism phase, made famous by these amazing voluptuous folding shapes. This, of course, existed in the history of sculpture, but an architect had never, really worked with these shapes and thought, how can we turn them into a work of architecture? This is an important moment, the Guggenheim Bilbao, because I think Gehry has jettisoned almost all of his previous architectural and artistic references. There is this curious obsession with fishes and animals, and then also kind of a Baroque-like undulation of in and out. But it's clear that Gehry is comfortable. He is at the height of his stature as a mature architect, and he's operating on a purely intuitive level. Intuition, some people say, is basically like wisdom. It's kind of divine, heavenly wisdom. So he is operating under different parameters when he is working on projects of this kind. Not only is he working with this radically new, intuitive way, but again, he's also making, I think, very direct references to this kind of holy, religious type of architecture with this main atrium space, which you could say has this kind of rough relationship to a kind of Baroque dome, as these broken up shards lead to this illuminated volume up above, albeit in Frank Gehry's own completely original, idiom. He's also working with and in discussion with Richard Serra. I think he's also looking at Jeff Koons. And Jeff Koons is an interesting person. the works are simultaneously accessible, they're fun, they put a smile on your face, and yet there's a solidity to them. There's a stability to them. There's a classical sense of symmetry and balance that is taking place. So again, while these are at the same time supposed to put a smile on their face, there is a degree of formality to them. And I think that formality, that symmetry, that kind of stately sense of decorum is present in this work here, a kind of advanced building, maybe not advanced, but another iteration of the kind of Bilbao style of architecture. This is the Walt Disney Concert Hall. This is the interior of that space, and has this kind of forest of columns and undulating ribbons. He also, at this time, builds this large tower in New York City. Frank Gehry has touched just about every single architectural type that there is, and done so with like extreme virtuoso skill. This is a bank that he does, the DZ Bank in Berlin. And I would say, once again, there is a kind of, without being a direct quotation of a religious architecture, there is a kind of religious sense of awe and quiet, and at the same time, kind of godlike turbulence that is taking place. You simultaneously have this totally irrational manifestation of pure spirit, and then you have, these, vortexical fields on the top and bottom, giving this thing velocity and momentum. It's very powerful, even though it's not, literally moving. It is this moving fluid space. This is his fourth period. This is not a work by Frank Gehry. This is another work by Jeff Koons. I would say this is kind of a late work by Jeff Koons as well, where it's basically like, get over it. I am who I am. And I think all of this work is absolutely extraordinary. There's a lot of large leaps and bounds that are taking place in terms of, a kind of musculature, a virtuoso with respect to folds and tectonic shapes, etc. This is the Louis Vuitton project. Here he's letting the material speak for itself. I think in these late works, he has pretty much jettisoned any semblance of relating to a classical architecture, and then operates in this totally new space. I have just about 4 minutes left. I want to say a little bit about Rem Koolhaas. I think we've been trained to look at the, quote, modern masters of the 20th century as more than just contributing to this, sterile, pragmatic attention to function. And we now kind of respect and revere Mies and Le Corbusier for suggesting this otherworldly, maybe prehistoric aura of mystery, and or ancient aura of mystery, kind of here and here. And there are a lot of architects where that aura is oddly absent. And I would say that by and large, that aura is largely absent in Rem Koolhaas's career. This is a project by the work of Hilmersheimer. This is Gropius's Bauhaus. So Le Corbusier, he famously said, "A house is a machine for living." This is a beautifully abstract statement, actually. They say it's a machine, so that's kind of a silly thing, but living is an extremely open-ended term. It's a machine for living. That could mean any number of things. That could mean communing with God. That could mean retreating. That could mean, having a wonderful time with your friends and family. Rem Koolhaas, on the other hand, he says the Downtown Athletic Club is a machine for metropolitan bachelors. That's a very finite expression, and he did that deliberately in a kind of tongue-in-cheek sort of way. He's referring to this project, and basically, I think on the whole, when I look at Rem Koolhaas's discourse contribution in terms of writing, and then also in terms of his architectural contribution, his built work, I think there is an over-attention to the body, to matter, to material, and perhaps less of a concentration in these kind of otherworldly, kind of mysterious realm of rhetoric and things like that. This is a project that's about technology. It's about other things, This is a Shinohara project. I don't have time to make this point about Mission Impossible, but it's a good point. Maybe we'll get to it. This is the CCTV project. I don't have any time to talk about that either. But in a lot of Rem Koolhaas's work, there's kind of a strange, I would say, fetish with expensive materials and kind of elitist European taste culture, which I'll be honest, it kind of rubs me the wrong way. That's just not Frank Gehry's aura. Frank Gehry, I feel like, is the architect of the people. That might sound strange, but I kind of feel that way. And I think that there's a lot of architects that kind of follow in the wake of Rem Koolhaas, and they similarly have just this kind of fetish with, you know, empty materials and pragmatism and things like that. There's a saying here, it says, where there is nothing, everything is possible. Rem says, where there is architecture, nothing else is possible. It's kind of a grouchy kind of posture to have. I think if you put all of Rem Koolhaas's writings in ChatGPT and asked for a summary, there'd be a lot of finger wagging and scoffing and kind of, you know, finger drumming and things like that. Meanwhile, if you look at the aesthetic, artistic contribution of Zaha Hadid and Frank Gehry, they're just down there playing music, having a good time, and celebrating Christmas. And Rem is, you know, in his ivory tower of what have you, being pissed off. He is the emperor. Frank Gehry is the fool. This is all about the kind of cosmic unity of the Vitra project. You know, who do you want to be? Do you want to be the emperor or do you want to be the fool? Just kind of, you know, following the yellow brick road, y'all. This is the yellow brick road building towards, you know, the Star of Bethlehem, you know. Anyways, that's my presentation. Frank Gehry, the GOAT.
So I'm glad that Ben went first, because he always gives inspiring and warm and light-hearted talks, and so I get to follow in the wake of that. Also, he, I think, beautifully described Gehry's buildings, showing a great passion for the architecture, which is one of the great benefits, I think, of doing this talk. But maybe it also speaks to some of the differences between Rem and Gehry already. That the passion for Gehry is this close reading of the buildings and what they mean, their stateliness, their holy qualities, their ghostly characteristics. You know, this is a very close and beautiful reading of architecture. And then also tracking the relationship between art and architecture, I thought was wonderful, because that, you know, he didn't say it explicitly, but the long debate that we have about whether architecture is an art or whether it's a functional thing, a service, which I think Wyatt is speaking to with the journal, saying at the beginning that we are in maybe the grip of a functionalist paradigm, and to really demonstrate architecture's relationship to art, that they learn from each other and they're in a parallel with each other. I think that was also a beautiful reading. So I think actually we agree on many things. Already we agree that Gehry is the warm architect that does beautiful buildings, and the connotations of his work have a transcendent and maybe even religious dimension to them. Rem is cold, cerebral, maybe cynical, in his head. This characterization that Ben has given us, I would wholly endorse. So I think the debate that we may end up having is between these two sides, you know. So Ben would imply that a warm, beautiful religious architecture is better than a cynical, cold, cerebral one, and I would say the opposite. So so we don't disagree on the characterization of these two architects, but maybe we disagree on the value system that we use to measure them. I also just want to say a little preamble, partly because my talk is really short, so Ben asked me to pad.
Yes.
It looked symmetrical. So I want to just say, Ben and I have been friends from the day he arrived, and we talk about Frank Gehry versus Koolhaas regularly. Particularly, we haven't done it for a while, but we went to Sakura Steakhouse a lot on Sundays for lunch and we just ended up talking, well, we talk about architecture all the time, but then we ended up often talking about Gehry and Koolhaas. So you should know that I always buy Ben a birthday present, and at least 2 occasions I bought him Frank Gehry related birthday like books, and this time a photograph that I took when I was a 19-year-old of the Guggenheim, I think 6 years after it had opened, framed and signed. So we have this like little dialogue going, and I think we said, actually before Wyatt reached out to us, we sort of muttered about bringing a debate on Gehry and Koolhaas to the school. So it was great that we had this opportunity. I think what we were thinking at the time was, well, we're just really passionate about architecture, and why aren't debates where we just talk passionately about architecture happening in the school? Some of the older colleagues tell me that they used to happen in the school far more frequently. On a Friday night in some of the side rooms, people would get together. But it's not happened as much. So I hope that this is the beginning of many, and looking around for faculty. So Bobby is going to be here pitching something against some other faculty, and maybe we'll rope in Marcus and Leandro and others. So I think debate is very important for several reasons. It creates a public space in which we share our ideas with one another. It's another format for education to happen. I think it's also more important now than ever, because something about the climate of our, I don't know, panopticon surveilled lives that makes it quite difficult to debate anymore. I have a theory that we've lost a boundary line between being private and being public, and we think of ourselves in public as if we're still our most private personal selves, wearing our pajamas and very vulnerable and exposed. So if you get a moment of conflict that happens, like I've seen this happen in conferences where somebody will say something critical and the whole room will go and people flush. And debates shouldn't be like that, and they weren't like that prior to, I don't know when, I don't know, the 80s, sometime in the 80s and the 90s. I don't know when this happened. I think it's because I think we should practice the art of debate where our ideas are not personal to us, but they're just ideas that we're playing with. So what I really like about this debate is the humorous nature of the goat framing. It's obviously silly. It's obviously a stupid argument. And even Rem and Koolhaas are kind of stupid people to be talking about in this day and age when the world is burning and there's so much more political, socially important things to be talking about than 2 guys who are nearly dead. It's almost as if, like, because we are just fanboys, and it reminds me of when I was young debating like Blur versus Oasis. So this is like 2 90s architects that we just love, and we're still attached to them, even though like probably half of you don't really learn about Rem Koolhaas or Frank Gehry anymore as the first thing you learn about, which, I mean, for me, in the 90s, both of these people were gods. I don't know if they are today. So that's what I think makes the whole thing, hopefully, there's on the one hand nothing at stake, but then there's also still quite a lot at stake, because the ideas that we'll discuss are still really important. And also, just like a final point on debate, one of my pet peeves is that I think as ChatGPT is training our cognitive capacities differently year by year, I see amongst my own students, when you ask them to critique something or say which is better than something else, that they struggle. And I wonder if that's, to some degree, that's also baked into ChatGPT. If we actually asked ChatGPT who was the greatest architect of all time, it would probably say something like, Rem has great qualities, Gehry has great qualities, Depends on how you see it, they're both equally good. So ideology is not something that even our these augmentative intelligence systems are helping us deal with. And it's a very human thing to actually take a stance on ideological matters. So there is ideology about this as well. So, all right, preamble over. Gary Koolhaas is the greatest architect of all time, and we should say these are both living architects, because he creates incredible buildings that manifest theoretical and disciplinary ideas. So I think too often one of the cliches is that theory and practice are opposed to one another. If you're into theory, then maybe you're not good at practice, and if you're really good at practice, then you don't know anything about theory. This is, I think, a boring cliche that helps people in school just not deal with one side of architecture, which is a bit lazy. And I think what is incredible about Koolhaas is that there's no opposition, and he says that incredible buildings can advance ideas that shape how we think about architecture. So he began with the ideas. He led with the theory, you could say. Maybe this is another interesting difference. There's a bit of Gary's work that Ben didn't share, which is just all this practical experience he had before he even became the Gary that we know. So he developed these ideas in paper architecture and also in incredible writing projects. He's a beautiful novelist. And in these, he argued a strong theoretical argument. He said something very polemical about architecture, that it's not the artistic expression of genius of the architect. It's not well-crafted, well put together tectonic construction. And it's not the creation of certain spaces which are good spaces that we like to be in, that we like to inhabit, with beautiful light and warm materials. I think these three things are truisms about architecture. They are utterly true, and I'm going to end by saying you should all do these three things, and you should make good buildings in these three terms. But what I think stands out about Koolhaas is that he said something, he challenged these cliches, you could say, or these norms of what's good. And he said that actually architecture could do something different, that it could stimulate social interaction. I think this is the main theoretical premise. Now, he didn't get this from nowhere. You could say there's a long tradition within modern architecture that architecture determines the way we behave in society. But actually, I have to say, I borrowed this from Ben in one of our Sakura lunchtime debates. I don't know if you remember this, but you pointed out that Koolhaas really derives his architecture from Archigram and Cedric Price. I think that's really true. So it's the social condenser, but what architecture determines is freedom, and that's the ideological part of Koolhaas. That he believes that architecture is an instrument that can change society, but in the direction of greater freedom rather than greater control. So it has a strong sense of politics attached to it. So part of that is Koolhaas's wicked embrace of capitalism. He said that the system that has guaranteed our freedom by unleashing the market and making all of the riches of the modern world that many on the left criticize for all of its destructive power and its alienating force and so on. He said he sort of combined this actually appreciation of the mechanisms of capitalism embodied in maybe the most emblematic building, the skyscraper, the dense interior air-conditioned building that is a product purely of economic logic. He combined that with this 60s vision of hippie freedom and liberation, and said actually capitalism is the thing that's going to bring about the greatest freedom. Now there's a sleight of hand there, because really also what he's saying is capitalism is actually going to liberate our desires and our pleasure, and he sort of assumes that desire is somewhat synonymous with freedom. We could debate that. I mean, that's probably one of maybe the weak points of whether or not he can really embrace capitalism in this sort of jujitsu move that he makes, turning it into his own, for his own purposes. Because some people could argue the opposite, that actually freedom comes out of collectivism. It comes out of a freedom from the market. A freedom to some degree is supported by the state and so on. But he's saying capitalism unleashes our sort of desire and a kind of interaction between individuals that's thrown together by these social condenser stroke fund palaces. And that there's a utopian dimension to this that he doesn't go into it in great detail, but hey, Marx didn't go into communism in great detail either, so somehow inside these dense metropolitan buildings, this sort of stimulated desires of these metropolitan bachelors is going to lead to another form of social life, another kind of existence. Society is going to progress in a sort of utopian direction. Now this cashes out so that's the theory side, but it cashes out in an incredible experimentation in architecture. That these provocative thoughts have direct provocative implications for everything about architecture, from the material through to the spatial and the constructional and the structural. So what it did specifically is that it unleashed the possibilities of using a very crude language of commercial architecture and tasteless forms and cheap, sort of reckless attitude. Now, you could say that that's the same as Gehry. The use of chain mail and chain link fence and other kinds of cheap materials is similar. But as Ben pointed out, even in Gehry's most kind of low material project of his house, there's an incredible warmth and a humanistic side to Gehry. Whereas I think for Koolhaas, this kind of embrace of clashing elements and crude materials conveys a larger idea about throwing people together in new ways, with this utopian notion behind it. And it's connected, so that's the material element, but it's connected in a synergy with a spatial exploration of fluid landscapes. There are landscapes in which people are going to mix and play and interact. So there's something about the material palette and the collage and the fluidity that's all aiming at the same sort of utopian thing. Now, briefly, I just want to put two buildings together, a Gehry building and a Koolhaas building, which I took my students in Riva in 23 to see. And so while showing you my own photographs has the limit that I'm emphasizing experience and a kind of promenade through these buildings, rather than a more analytic exploration of models and plans and so on. But nonetheless, it was useful, I think, to show you how I see these buildings, how I saw them, and how these photographs represent the way I looked at them when I was visiting them. So, and usefully, they're of a relatively similar time frame. They're both 90s projects. So the American Center is ultimately, I would say, a good building in the way that Gary handles the complex language. The orientation is clear. There's good rules of thumb about how to make a nice entrance, that you have space in which to step off the street, take your coat off, get dry. There's a threshold, then you enter the building, and then inside the building, there's a clear path to sort of central space, a mezzanine that's got beautifully softened light from skylights. And that kind of crunched forms that he derived from his early sort of deconstructivist language actually leads to a very pleasant, picturesque variety. And the material palette is, again, warm, but also relatively coherent. There's the stone and timber and metal and glass, but they work well together. So in contrast, details. In contrast, the educatorium has no hierarchy. You enter on an inclined plane, which is like a piece of infrastructure that belongs to the city. There's no threshold. There's just a thin glass sliding door that lets you inside. And when you're inside, you're still kind of outside because you're on the same inclined plane that then spreads throughout the whole building. And there's no depth in this building. Everything is accessible from the same continuous spatial flowing kind of floor plan. You can get to everything with just one door, and there's no corridors. But there's no, it's not easy to comprehend the building in a whole. There's no lobby in the way that we just saw in the American Center. So the spaces crash together unapologetically, kind of embracing the things that are the product of some other logic, like the economics or the desire to create interaction. Like, he doesn't care about the elegance of handling construction and form at this level of detail. He sort of embraces the these kind of useless spaces. The building is full of glass of all kinds and voyeuristic conditions that provoke unexpected visual connections between people on the inside and the outside. This glass, for example, that he used, it changes its transparency depending on the angle at which you're looking at it. So as you walk by, it's obscure, and as you look directly through it, you can actually see directly into the auditorium where the students are. And he's played with transparency in other kinds of projects to create voyeuristic conditions, like in the Prada, where you were in the changing rooms and the glass goes from transparent to opaque while you're getting changed. Hopefully not while you're getting changed, but so glass and things like that are designed to create this visual connection. The materials are junky, as I said, like they're like those of a nightclub with corrugated plastic, metal mesh, neon lights. And all in all, the space is not good in the sense that we've been saying. It's jarring, cold, urban, and there's a terrible sense of glare throughout this building because it's such a deep plan, reflective materials, and then a wide, transparent facade on either side. So it's very hard to look. It's exactly what Ben was saying when he said that avant-garde architects giving cave-like, dungeon-like spaces. So given this description, why am I saying that Koolhaas's buildings are incredible? Ultimately, architecture, in my view, should wake us up a little. It should cause us to reflect, and it should be critical. So I don't think Gary's work does this. I think it sells us a dream of the future, of a heroic artist. It tends to be shiny, like jewelry. The ugliness of Koolhaas's architecture is part of this cerebral, critical project. It's confusing, a little shocking, stimulating, but socially provocative. So for me, he's the greatest architect of all time because his buildings manifest a larger idea about politics, society, and history, and because they are critical and they're challenging and they're provocative. Now, we can't literally say that his buildings do stimulate social interaction and did bring about utopian forms of life. It's not ultimately about the literalness of that theoretical claim. In my view, it's about the fact that the architecture speaks about larger theoretical ideas in society, in culture, in history, about politics, about systems of government, about the way we live, about desire, all these things. So for me, architecture is especially good when it advances ideas about architecture, when it proposes things that are other architects can react to, that can stimulate debates like this. And in my view, our buildings should always be well crafted, be beautiful spaces that are well lit and accommodate our habits and so on. Most of you should strive for this in all of your buildings. But it's okay for some buildings to risk breaking from the norm about what we know to be good, to do something bad in order to advance knowledge and further the debate and ideas about architecture. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'll turn it. Okay, we're gonna just transition now into the sort of forum between the two. It'll be about 15, 20 minutes. They'll discuss their ideas, a little review, and then we'll open it up to the audience. We're gonna take a sec to change the cameras. I'm gonna turn off the PowerPoint, and then we'll be ready to go.
I was wondering if you could articulate the difference between Rem Koolhaas, who is not necessarily interested in doing a post-occupancy analysis of whether the building successfully achieves XYZ, result. I was wondering, so in that sense, the architecture is a kind of rhetorical idea. It's a hypothetical scenario. It's like it's a stage set. I was wondering if you could make a distinction between Rem Koolhaas's buildings, which might be trying to advocate for a certain type of like open, democratic, inclusive, diverse, whatever word you want to use, landscape, versus Gary's buildings, which might be advocating for the exact same kind of political idea, but through the means of sculpture, ornamentation, etc. Does that make sense?
So you're saying, is it linked to you saying Gary is a people's architect, that he's aiming at an architecture which is inclusive, diverse, the words you were using, you're saying that Gary is doing that, and that Rem is doing that with his. No.
I'm not
please.
saying that. I'm not saying that Gary is doing it and Rem isn't doing it.
Right.
What I'm saying is that neither of them are interested in doing a post-occupancy analysis of how their buildings positively enrich the communities that they are situated in.
Yeah.
Both of them are clearly interested in the language of architecture as expressing an idea, but it's a kind of rhetorical statement. And Gary's looks more overtly abstract, as though it belongs to the realm of aesthetics, painting, sculpture, etc. Whereas Rem Koolhaas's has little arrows that say this is where people debate and this is where inclusivity happens.
Yeah. Okay. They're both.
I would say one other thing. Rem Koolhaas, it's like Rem Koolhaas's architecture for me, in that sense, is kind of like the proverbial meditation building. It's the proverbial meditation pavilion in which, in the history of the human race, not a soul has ever meditated, except for the one in our library, by the way. Do you guys know that people? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, people use that space.
People do use that one. That's legit.
Okay, so both of them are doing architecture with a capital A, you could say,
Yes.
right? I'm reminded of the famous scene where Gary sticks a middle finger to reporters criticizing him, and says something like, give me a break. Like all the architecture in the world is just terrible, and just some of us are just trying to make a few good buildings,
Right.
And his point is, what's wrong with being able to, turn away from the norm and do something exceptional? What's wrong with that in the scheme of things, in like all the world's buildings? And I think they both just have different ways of doing something that's exceptional, or different alibis. And Gary's alibi is about artistic genius to some degree, and expression, and Rem's is about criticality, and sort of intellectual force of critical ideas linked to political pretensions, avant-gardist formula about potentially changing society. They both have claims that their architecture, you could link both of these two alibis for like great architecture or exceptional architecture to some kind of social purpose down the line. You could say the critical project is aiming at a society which might be better. It's waking us up. It's keeping us all alive, keeping us all thinking and debating, and it's open to history and so on. And you could say about Gary, this I think what you're saying about Gary is that the genius and the expression, while it's very personal, happens to cash out in very generous kinds of spaces which are beautiful to be in, open to all, belong to everyone. And maybe there's an element of this where you characterize Rem as you said he was too linked to European taste culture. And so it's interesting, this character.
You disagree?
I mean, clearly he's doing this Faustian deal with the devil with Prada, right? But that fits into my narrative about his ability to try to do this sort of jujitsu move on capitalism. It's just that, Prada is an embodiment of capitalism, and he feels that he can do this dance with the devil and come out on top. So I don't think, it's a nice sort of ironic and maybe duplicitous thing, but I think his critical side would tell him that he can engage with powerful forces like the Chinese government with the CCTV project and still potentially do something critical, even in a place where you apparently can't be critical. And even Prada, like there's aspects to that store that mock consumerist dimensions of fashion, like the clothes move on rails like the racks of meat from the meatpacking district, and it treats fashion as this kind of industrial product, and it does things to comment critically on the nature of fashion. But it's very true that he is also. I think the thing where he might be more elite than Gary is if we think that, in that cliche I was giving earlier on about students thinking theory and practice don't go together, I think sometimes one of the arguments against theory is it's like too brainy, it's too intellectual and maybe slightly elite. Like discourse and reading books and things like that are. I think we have a populist mood these days. You even get this discourse in contemporary politics, right? The cosmopolitan elites in their East Coast, West Coast universities, or the Ivy League universities, and so on. So I think there's a way in which Koolhaas might look elite just because he's actually very cerebral and discursive. And Gary could be said to therefore be for the people by precisely not getting engaged too much in words and ideas and writing and discourse, but just doing things that are making the buildings, and those buildings speak directly, and everyone can access them because you don't have to know the theory. You just have to be in the buildings and understand them. And I think that is probably the secret of Gary's success, because I think is Koolhaas ever been on The Simpsons? I don't think so, right? It's just Gary, right?
I think CCTV was like one of the models in the competition, actually.
Yeah, on The Simpsons.
Yeah.
Okay. But I do think Gary is probably more of a household name, more loved And I wonder if one of the aspects to his popular success, so he's literally, of the people, he's popular, because there isn't a lot of, you don't have to wade through SML Excel. You can just sort of appreciate quite directly what the architecture is about. Sorry, I took your question and sort of turned it maybe into something else. I mean, you were trying to say, I think you were trying to ask something about how the two of them relate to the people. And I just added in there, maybe there's something we can debate here. Like, is it true that is this characterization of Gary as accessible and Rem as, I think that the characterization I've just given, what I'm implying is that it should fall apart if we don't accept the theory and practice are distinct and opposite. So if you agree with my claim that the onus is on you as an architect to be both a theorist and a practitioner at the same time, then it wouldn't be very easy to say that Gary's work is more accessible than of the people. Or maybe it would. I don't know.
Do you think that Gary's work communicates an original theory of architecture? Maybe not to the same extent that Rem Koolhaas's books do, but within the same league?
I think one of the issues there is the question, is Gary's work expressionist in the way German expressionist architecture was? Like Mendelssohn, or who's the guy who did Alpine architecture? This is kind of crystalline, expressive projects that were imagined in the 20s. So expressionism isn't original.
Is that Taut?
Taut, yeah. Thanks, Bruno Taut. Expressionism isn't original. So the position of an expressive practice is not Gary's original invention. But I think what's incredibly original is the language. And he's clearly a brilliant architect in that he can formulate a language all of his own, which is unique. It's a signature thing. It's incredibly difficult to do. He's invented his own style, and he's made the style adaptable to not conflict with human occupation and use, to make good buildings with good light and all the things I praised him for. To do that with that language is such an incredible feat. So in that sense, he's really inventive. But is that a theoretical stance? I think ultimately it's kind of an expressionistic humanist position. And you could say that is a theoretical stance. It's just that he doesn't argue for it, so it's hard to tell. I mean, it's implicitly probably just part of the work.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that his kind of distinct phases do have a theoretical substance to them. His house kind of breaking down the notion of some like stable house. I mean, I think the Villa d'Ava project is very much critical of the idea of some kind of like nuclear family. And so there's not some central dining table where, the father presides over the wife and the children and things like that. Everybody has their own distinct, volume within that house. And so that project is kind of a critique on domesticity. And I think could be connected to, other writings of Rem Koolhaas having this kind of like social implications. I would say that, Rem Koolhaas, Gary kind of dissolving his own house and all of these other houses into this totally informal character is also like a similar, sabotage of the formality of the household. And similarly, to break down, a big corporation like the New York Times or progressive These are like large, like corporate clients of his, and to present their projects in this totally informal, open sort of language is. I feel like it has kind of theoretical implications.
It's certainly true of his house in Santa Monica in the early period, I think. I mean, at the time in the 70s, 78, like there was such a dominant conversation in politics in the country about the critique of domestic space based on feminism in architecture schools, and there are lots of people from like Dolores Hayden's How to Make a Non-Sexist City and her work on, in general, on like the Grand Domestic Revolution. There were lots of projects criticizing houses. You could think of Diller and Scofidio doing the withdrawing room at MoMA. The idea of violating the house, maybe this starts also with Eisenman a little bit. So Gehry is definitely violating the house, and that is a critical project. And at some level, just a fragmented language.
But he's also violating museums.
Yeah.
He's also violating, the Chiat Day headquarters. These extremely, kind of elitist institutions of like wealth, and instead of putting a marble front desk in the main lobby, he's having this kind of rustic chain link aesthetic as though the place is kind of incomplete.
There's two things though that we could debate to what degree, there could be a debate as like who's the biggest sellout, Gehry or Koolhaas, like because both of them in the 90s like were wrapped up in globalization. The Bilbao effect turned Gehry into a star architect, and Rem like famously kind of he was a surfer on the wave of neoliberalism. So both of them could be seen as both critical but also like losing their criticality at the hands of the very kind of global economy that turned them into star architects. I think a case could be made that Koolhaas did a better job of like reflectively criticizing the very thing that was happening to him, because he also went through phases which I left out of the presentation. But like after the early work, he gets involved in shape making, which is about creating icons, right? And there was this conversation at the time about iconic architecture, and the Seattle Library has a very clear profile, very imagistic, like Gehry's Bilbao in some way. And he went through a phase of those kinds of projects, Seattle, Porto Music Hall, and others, but then publicly criticized it in lectures about how architects had got too involved in star architecture. He would show photographs of all of him and Herzog and de Meuron and Nouvelle chasing around global clients one after the other, looking silly. And then he said, we really shouldn't do this, and his architecture shifted again to become much more mute. So I think the key project there was the Dubai Renaissance, where he showed this, you've probably all seen this collage of a cacophonous skyline of like all the different towers shouting for attention. And then his project was just this, almost like the slab out of 2001 at the beginning, like this just monolithic slab made of the typical kind of facade that he always admired in the work of Harrison in New York. So he has the ability to self-critique, I guess that's ultimately what I'm saying. And even though he is just as caught up in the selling out of architecture to global capitalism, I think Gehry doesn't really have a defense as much, maybe.
Yeah, there's another aspect of Gehry's theoretical contribution, let's say, unwritten, which is the type of practice that he modeled for the rest of the field. And so to say that you could make a house one of the most iconic, internationally well-known houses of the 70s with a very inexpensive addition, something like $40,000, is a very powerful, theoretical statement that galvanized like a lot of architects, mostly in the United States, to, go out there, work with their hands, and then, we see the product of all of that, Tom Main's office being like an extremely noteworthy like practice that like deliberately got engaged with the means of construction, and as their office like picked up like steam and scale, they're able to challenge structure and materials and cladding systems in these extremely complex ways because they're kind of on the other side of the fence. And then there is the other like major theoretical contribution. Again, there wasn't, Apple kind of had a manifesto of sorts. Steve Jobs at various points through ad campaigns, wrote certain things about being outliers and, think different and things like that. These are kind of, polemical, theoretical statements. But largely it's the contribution to society through their work, through the computers, through the interface. So, Gary is pretty much single-handedly associated with the computer renaissance. There is no architect who can claim that title in the early 90s to have, pretty much revolutionized the industry, in his own like literally ragtag way, building a BIM software, 20 years before Revit even began production, and then building that installation in Spain, and then in Barcelona, and then shortly after building the Bilbao project. The kind of ripple effects of, again, his style of practice as this early renegade DIY practice, and then his style of practice later as this mature technologist who is only interested in the most cutting edge, is like not to be underestimated.
Yeah. A response to a couple of things, and I think we should probably open it up. In a way, REM can only do big, right? That's in the theory from the outset. So Gary, I think, has been more inspiring to young architects today who find it beneficial to work with a small-scale informal language. And obviously, I'm just thinking of the book that I helped Michael Meredith publish called Smaller Architecture, which is a critique of Koolhaas's position in bigness, basically. So the current generation does not want to follow Koolhaas into doing metropolitan, big-scale buildings, partly because it seems unethical, and they also can't imagine getting corporate clients of that scale. So Gary's language, I grant this to what you're saying, it's the early work is being very inspiring to young LA architects like the LADG and others. People are able to go back to Gary's early work right now because it does lend this informal, small-scale, potentially more like ethical kind of practice. But paradoxically, though, and this speaks to what you're just saying about the digital, one thing we've often discussed about Gary is how brilliant a businessman he is. And Koolhaas's office could only really do what it did out of the free unpaid labor of students that were connected to all of his teaching at the AA and Pratt and Harvard. When they were doing all these incredible projects like the libraries in the 80s, nobody was getting paid for years, but Gary, I think, has never had the same attitude to academia. He's never quite been dependent on academia. He's been given critiques now and then and done studios at Yale, but he's not so much in the world of academia. And instead, his office has always built, like you've always pointed this out to me, they come in on budget. And it's because the practice parallels this artistic image of Gary, the signature genius, with an incredible machine of project management, which is related to everything you're saying about CATIA. I wouldn't say he's pioneering with the digital as a design tool. I'd say, because ultimately the Lewis house was designed analog and then scanned and digitized. And what was innovative about that project...
That is innovative.
It's innovative to scan, but to
like,
contrast it to the whole project at GSAP in the 90s, to think about how digital forms were tools of design, and to use Maya and animation software like Greg Lynn and Asymptote and Foreign Office Architects. I think they did more sort of avant-garde digital work than Gary did. Gary manifested it. Gary showed you. Gary had the operations to build those forms, and he already had those forms from his sculptural days. He didn't have to use the computer to come up with those forms. He just cut straight to the chase of like, how do I get this beautifully run office that I have to do these incredible things, and he knew how to do it. And I think very few architects. Koolhaas only managed to get his act together, famously when the office was bankrupt, and he got the person that ran Schiphol Airport to run his office. So if you can run an airport, you can run an architecture practice. And that was quite late in the day. And now the practice makes money, but for a long time it was a shit show, as they say. Should we open it up? Do you want to Do you want to take? Oh, good. Okay.
All right. So now, if anybody has any questions or points, or if there's things that they said that rubbed you the wrong way, I implore you to bring them up. And if anybody, we want to.
I'd like to just ask you a point about maybe the influence of the LA school as it now relates to young practitioners. You talked about Andrew Holder of the LABG. They're not coming from maybe a formal stance. It is a little bit about that informality of construction, that accessibility as a young person to build, not having to rely on a client per se. But I wonder what that says about Gary, though, that directly relates to his work also as a young person, which is some 7 decades or 6 decades past now. How do you think that still holds true with people like Errico and Moss, who are also getting older, Michael Rotondi as well? Just some of these figures and how LA is being influenced by Frank, because I don't think we're seeing it formally. It seems like that's been exported to like young Chinese architects, kind of strangely enough. It's happening east. Koolhaas's whole thing is like go east, right? It seems it hasn't really stayed in the West.
What hasn't stayed in the West?
Gary's formalism.
Oh, you're saying like Mad.
Yeah, people like Mad, even like younger people that are now probably not coming out of graduate school.
Well, yeah, Andy Lynn, if he watches this, which I don't know if he will, but he was giving me a hard time about why we were having this, debate / conversation, and moreover, why I would advocate Gary, because he's, quote, totally irrelevant. I would just simply say, I told him in this text, I said, as soon as Michelangelo died, that kind of trajectory of research and kind of spatial experimentation, ornamentation stopped completely, and there was no one really to pick up the mantle until like Borromini and a little bit Palladio, but that was quite a number of decades later. And then following Borromini's death, there was nobody to really pick up that mantle. So I think that there's a rather sinister campaign to make Gary's early work seem more relevant and significant than his later work, which is a way of kind of stabbing him in the face. kind of humiliating him, and also it gives people the opportunity to not set themselves against this, I call, like, Baroque heroic standard. And I think that it's difficult to go to that level. There's a lot of great interviews with people who worked with, like, Stanley Kubrick, and with a lot of films, like, Stanley Kubrick asked his actors to go to 10, to really overact to a preposterous kind of melodramatic level, almost so that you're just at that line of just silliness and melodrama. But somehow, through his directorial skill and the skill of the actors, it works. So I think Gary is, like, similarly asking his team in a lot of those heroic works to go to 10 and be just like 1 millimeter beneath, like, melodrama, and the result is like a pseudo-religious experience of, like, ecstasy. And I don't really think that was available to him with the scale and the budget that he was working with in his early works, and just the limitation of technology. But that shouldn't be some kind of justification for our generation to, set our sights lower.
We're already kind of historicizing the question of how we receive Gary's work and Koolhaas's now, given recent circumstances. So I think Gary's heroic phase, as you point out, is probably as unpopular as Zaha Hadid's work is unpopular. I think Zaha Hadid's work is incredible, and it will come back to be adored in the future, I'm sure of it. But right now, it's like nobody wants to talk about it, despite those buildings being incredibly pioneering and just wonderful buildings. If you ever visit them, they're just well made as well. I think the 90s to the mid-90s to 2008 was a period in which everyone was so obsessed by the possibility of new forms and bringing them to realization. And that arc is now ended, and it's linked to the exuberism of the neoliberal bubble. And we're in this kind of post-crash moment of ethics, and the new issue of Log is about the new brutalism. Is turning back to the kind of ordinariness of the Smithsons. And so that's why ultimately, if there's a Gary that resonates today, it's the Gary of cheap materials, not the Gary of the heroic period. And it's just our historical mood that prevents us from appreciating the kind of transcendent qualities of the heroic, because we just see it as so wrapped up in neoliberal capitalism. Which is a shame, because you're probably right. Like, there's probably incredible qualities to the Gary, like there is to Zaha, that we will appreciate in the future. But for now, people find inspiration in the small work. So I would say LADG, and actually the second book a little plug here, the second book coming after Smaller Architecture is by Andrew Holder, and it's called On Assembly, and his idea is to argue for architecture as a composition of assembled parts, and it's very inspired by Gary's early work. The idea of a certain informality and an openness is meant to convey a lot of values that we have about inclusivity. So Gary's work speaks really well to that, and that's why I think we go there. And it's not just LADG, you could point to so many other architects, like Current Interests and
I think it's part of
many others.
Like coming to the East to study for graduate school and going back, because you see Eisenman and a lot of these newer projects now as well, sort of like the index correlation to things. Recently, Michelle Chang's work or something like that.
Right.
So yeah, I just wanted to get a big idea of like the label.
So there was a question behind you, and there was also one on hand over here, and I don't remember who was first. Did you? I think you were probably first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just had a quick question. So, like, as far as like either of these architects being representative or trying to take into consideration like the social implications of the structures they're building, two things I kind of just pulled away from this. One, on one hand, with Gary, it kind of seems like he's attacking sort of like institutions of form, structure, or compartmentalization of space with the architecture that he's putting forward. But then on the other hand, with like Koolhaas, especially with some of like the some of the examples that you showed, he's considering how like subjects or individuals are like moving through those spaces. And so to the extent with like this sort of like dark, cold, like dungeon-esque space, perhaps like maybe that's like intentional, right? Like you're supposed to move through that space in the same way that you have this sort of compartmentalization of space before you get to that sort of strange like internal courtyard, right? So my question, I guess, is with those things in mind, to me it would seem like Koolhaas is doing more socially, just because I'm not exactly convinced that to show architecture to a number of individuals necessarily is a better foot forward than trying to design for people to have interactions within a space. And so I like just kind of like either of your thoughts on that, or both, preferably.
Well, I would agree with what you're saying. I mean, I'm trying to understand, because you're echoing to some degree. I read the first part of what you were saying to point out the degree to which Gary was critical of institutions. Was that like he's able to disrupt them? And then you're drawing this analogy to the kind of social energy that. So you're sort of positioning both of them a little bit as having a social project in mind. Is that right? But then you're favoring Koolhaas, the social project, because the actual literal interaction is more important than the social critique?
Yeah, like I don't know if it's enough to
like the institutional critique
show in Gary's case.
Right.
And try to like break away like people's like familiarity with institutions of architecture versus like designing architecture to like intentionally have people interact in specific ways, even if you're using a conventional form of compartmentalization.
So Koolhaas' work speaks of function. Like, everyone says it's all about program, and people talked about cross-programming and throwing different programs together and all that kind of thing. But paradoxically, even though Gary doesn't speak about function, I think from a humanist point of view, it probably does a really good job of actually creating all those restful moments where people sit together and talk and interact. So it's more about at the level of, they're doing something different at the level of ideas. I think Gary's buildings, that was part of my actual critique of Gary, is to say that his buildings are good. Like, they actually are really good buildings. It's amazing how all of that experimentation doesn't lead to bad spaces. The spaces are wonderful. So probably the good spaces is facilitating a lot of social interaction on a very like functional, literal level. But he just invests all of his energy into a different alibi, as I was calling it, a different legitimation narrative that if he gets to like a social payoff for what he's doing, I guess it's more around, what is it? It's like the world needs beautiful architecture and the spaces are really good. He doesn't really have a social alibi, does he? I mean, at least Koolhaas has this utopian thing about great things are going to happen in the future after this energizing space changes the people that use it. So he's got this delayed link to some kind of social provocation. But Gary's sort of narrative about the social implications of his work is just more like, it's beautiful. Is that right? I'm looking at you for affirmation.
Well, I mean, Gary is famously aloof and kind of cryptic and disinterested in, kind of putting words to the
Yeah.
kind of social utility of his building. That's why he doesn't give lectures or answer kind of unanswerably difficult
Right.
philosophical questions. I think it's just kind of a beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and kind of the social utility, cultural benefit is like similarly in the eye of the beholder. And I think that if the beholder is some kind of market constituency, clearly the market places a lot of value in Gary's contribution. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been the prolific builder that he is. We should take
Yeah,
another question.
last question.
Yeah.
Well, two more.
Oh, yeah, two more.
Okay,
Sorry,
yeah.
I didn't see the other hand.
Thank you for the conversation.
Pleasure.
But so I would critique point of accusing Koolhaas as this like capitalist, consumed by capitalism and the product and everything. I think that's not fair, because I feel like even Gary is under this power of capitalism and rich people, and just like all star architects are doing. But I think what makes Koolhaas to have claim the unique position among these people in this society is that that he is aware and that he is willfully carrying out the role of capitalist, but he also expresses the hesitation and anguish about the capitalism society through his design, even though he's working for this type of capitalist machine companies and rich people. So in that sense, I think that's why Koolhaas takes a more unique position, especially in contemporary society, and which leads, I think, to that Gary is more interested in creating innovative space and formally, and especially built forms, permanent built spaces. But especially we're living in a society where architecture it seems like expanding more, its definition expanding more from permanent buildings to rather even more variety of forms for ephemeral spaces, or even books, or even outside of buildings. And Koolhaas's interest in him being cynical and critical about how the city works and how the architecture operates in an urban scale, I think it is, rather than for us students also, Koolhaas's position of being critical about, like, not even just skyscrapers in the city, but recently about like relationship between agricultural and metropolitan. How will we like think about this like new upcoming age? And I think this is, rather than trying to inventing something new that people have never seen, having a different perspective on what is already existing and happening in our society, and having a critical point of that is more important in contemporary architects nowadays.
Yeah, okay, great. You're throwing me a really soft one, and I just want to use this to hopefully pivot the entire audience towards Koolhaas. I think Koolhaas is an intellectual. He has had debates in public and in print with other intellectuals like Anthony Negri and Peter Sloterdijk. Those figures wouldn't take Gary seriously as an intellectual to talk to. But Koolhaas is, I think we should be proud that our field as architects have a figure that other major intellectuals want to debate, want to talk to. And I think the intellectual side to Koolhaas, the reason why he has that respect from other fields, comes from the fact that he's always engaged practice in such a way as to constantly talk about and expose the problems of being an architect. And it's definitely followed through in all these critical exhibitions like Chrono Chaos and the rural. He's constantly looking for things that our field is facing and developing a conversation around that, and then bringing it into the work. He's constantly thinking. But it began early on. I love still SML Excel. I think if anybody has not purchased or read that book, you should. It's just incredible depth of thought and ideas in that. But what it is basically an expose of an office. It turns the office inside out. All the statistics about how the office works, all the projects that they lost, their dynamics with the clients. There's a beautiful cartoon, like a comic sequence of a project in Japan where they like narrate, I think it's the Fukuoka project, they narrate the sort of power struggles with the clients, and they show you architecture's complicity with power. So he's always done that. He's always, I guess it's because he's a writer and a script writer, and he's always told the story about architecture. In a way, he's done that. That's why I admire him, maybe more so than the buildings. The buildings are incredible, as I keep saying, and they have all kinds of payoffs for this, for the polemical things he puts forward about architecture. But I think ultimately I admire him as an intellectual, because, as I said at the end of my talk, it's furthering the debate and the reflection on architecture and what it is and what we do and so on. He's contributed to that in an enormous way. So.
And then we had another question.
Yeah, I was wondering what you guys see as the value of interpretability of the architecture. And by that, you guys kind of brought up that Gary doesn't write a whole lot, and Rem Koolhaas writes a whole lot and explains a whole lot. And it reminds me of the idea of like, it's a bad joke if you have to explain it. And that, we talk about that, like, well, we want people to, or why is our field continually like falling into like obscurity? And the more we mire it in like deep philosophical ideas, the more we dissociate it from everybody else. And I get that it's like a part of pushing it forward, but there's probably like a great underlying theory to how Gary actually thought about his buildings. But it doesn't matter that I can't understand that. I can still look at it and be like, this is amazing.
This is my guy.
He's throwing you the softball too.
Yeah, I mean,
we have two plants in the audience.
Yeah, right.
I was wondering if like the value of the intelligibility, the word I used before, where it's like you can draw something from it that maybe wasn't intended, versus the direct relationship to theory. Like, which one do you see as a value, or is it?
Do you want to take this?
Well, I mean, I go to art museums searching for that tingly feeling in the back of your neck, and I don't really care about the other 99%. And I'll go to a great museum like the MoMA or the Met, and maybe only one piece will do that, and then the rest is just kind of, I don't really care. It's just pretty, and it's just wallpaper, and I recognize it as art, but it doesn't move me on an emotional level. And again, I think that Gary's work communicates to a certain audience, perhaps my audience, on an intuitive level, a kind of wordless level. And I think that he is also working on his models and his drawings, his buildings, on a similarly intuitive kind of wordless level. I think that Rem Koolhaas is largely responsible for the kind of disgusting, narcissistic navel-gazing that is the Academy. Because, I mean, it's like, SML XL is kind of like, and then I had fried chicken for dinner, and then I had soup, and then my mom called and she asked if I wanted a new red sweater, and I said I actually wanted a green one. And then I took a plane, and I was upgraded to first class because, somebody wasn't there, so they bumped me up. It's just like, who cares, My face is getting weird because I'm just like, who the cares, And it's just, I mean, it's kind of disgusting. I have to say, it's just like, and then we met with this political dignitary, and they kind of invited us, and this really wealthy real estate developer was like, you have to do it this way, and we were obstinate, we wouldn't compromise. I mean, people seek out Frank Gehry. They want these anecdotes. They seek them out. Rem Koolhaas shows you the anecdotes. You just kind of writes. It's a little bit weird, you guys. Just forget it. I mean, it's like, I don't know. I think that this is the question. It's the greatest of all time. Let's compare the buildings, and then we'll leave it to you guys to decide. And then let's look at the literary contribution of Rem Koolhaas, and then let's look at Leo Tolstoy, my friend, or Franz Kafka. I mean, it's just like, as a literary contribution to humanity, yeah, Rem Koolhaas is like, that little press conference that Frank Gehry gave at this thing, he sounded like such an idiot. But it's like, yeah, but that's like playing basketball with a 3-year-old. It's like, or playing basketball with some geriatric scientist who's never played basketball. It's like, let's put Rem Koolhaas against Kafka or Cervantes or whatever, and then let's talk about the kind of spiritual depth and the quality of the prose, the quality of the kind of, what is his whatever. He's a great writer. He's probably one of the greatest writers in our field, but that doesn't really matter. That's kind of like saying he's the funniest sportscaster in the world. But it's like, yeah, but is he funnier than Louis C.K.? It's like, well, you might be the funniest sportscaster ever, but are you a true comedian? Is Rem Koolhaas a writer? Or is he an architect? Is a dilettante writer?
I think he's a writer, but the architecture is, this doesn't work. I think the architecture is still good.
Of course.
There was a debate between Rem Koolhaas and
It's only Gehry and Rem. I mean, we decided this is a gift. So there's others, but it goes without saying.
Yeah,
it's great.
I mean, there was a debate between Rem and Eisenman where at the AA recently it was published in a little book called Supercrit. And Rem has a beautiful way of dealing with the debate with Eisenman, because Eisenman is even more cerebral than Rem Koolhaas. And is known for like critical architecture, disciplinary architecture. And Rem's position in that debate is just to gush over how exquisite and beautiful Eisenman's work is. And he's like, it's so delicate, and the colors and the filigrees and I would like to do something similar with Rem, that even though I'm painting him as cerebral, I don't think it rules out his work being beautiful. I mean, we're prone to think of Gehry as beautiful because that's the way we're meant to think about Gehry's work, because there's not another way to think about it. But I hope you realize that when I call Koolhaas's work ugly, I don't actually really think it's ugly. I do actually think it's really beautiful. So just the fact that he drove the architecture with the ideas doesn't stop the results from being beautiful and being an architectural contribution. I do think there's some, maybe to also be fair to this final point, because I think it's a really strong point. Architecture as a profession has done poorly maintaining its connection to the public or to clients. We've been losing out to developers. We've been losing our authority within the profession. Like, there's just a litany of all kinds of ways in which architecture has been slowly diminished. And Gehry is probably a stronger model for the empowering of the profession, to give it a stronger connection, a rigorous business model, a competency, a quality of work, and so on. I think a strong indictment of Koolhaas is that, like you're saying, the model that he created maybe in the long run isn't good for the profession. But then that would, like what I'm saying is good because it's about ongoing debates and fostering ideas. So it's kind of a academic and disciplinary idea of what counts as good. there is a problem with how we sustain that within the academy and maintain the professional viability and connection to clients. And there's more opening and promise in Gary's model for precisely not getting caught up in the academy and just getting on with the work and having a great practice. That maybe we should, that's one of the things we should do, but I don't know, I kind of wake up in sweats at night over how do we do that without losing the debate. Anyway, but that seems to be the great quality of Gary, to give him his due in this debate. So maybe we should do the final.
We got to do the count.
This is really
Oh, yeah.
cool, and I promise this
Yeah.
isn't about necessarily the debate. So like the idea of a goat, you know, people could argue back and forth. So you have a team of 5, right? And like someone's making assists, someone's making scores, right? So who's, for each of you guys, who's your 6th man? So go down the line just to like, you know, okay, so we got Ren, we've got Gary, but in your mind,
Living.
like, who's the 6th person off? Who's the person off the bench that you would take?
Living?
Doesn't matter, just like
Has to
I
be
think
living.
living,
It has to
yeah.
be living.
Living.
give like a spectrum of like we talked about Gary and Cool House,
Yeah.
like 2 other people for you
Right.
to throw out. Yeah.
Go.
I put them on such a mythological level. I would hesitate to kind of tarnish their name by association with.
I don't think anybody passed him the ball.
Kind of, there's some, you know, definitely, you know, some kind of attaboys, pat on the back, you know, here and there. Yeah, I don't know. Like,
I could answer this.
dare you
easily.
profane
Yeah.
this conversation by the mention of, okay.
For me,
Let's hear it.
Sana would stand very
Okay.
close.
Okay.
And of late, even though
Yeah.
young and not well known here, but very dominant in Belgium, I would say Jan de Wilde as well, as to me a major and important figure that will stand the test of time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I love it.
All right, can we get a final show of hands of who thinks that Ren, also you have to pick between the 2.
Yeah. No on the fences.
No on the fences,
You
yeah.
have to decide now. So raise your hand for Ren Koolhaas. Oh, damn.
Oh, well, we'll see.
We'll
Okay,
see.
let's count
We'll
them.
see. We'll see. We'll see.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Okay.
All
Now
right.
raise your hand for Frank Gary. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Close. I think you've won.
Okay, that was 2. I think that's 1. There we go.
There we go. Yeah, we did it. All right.
Sweet.
Well done.